Thank you very much. Well, thank you all for attending this meeting of the Universal Services Select Committee, the fourth of four, you'll be glad to hear. This is the last one we're doing. This meeting is being recorded and webcast live on YouTube via the County Council's website. Filming is also permitted by the press and public, and so by remaining at the meeting, you are consenting to potentially being recorded. Please be aware that filming is only permitted in the room whilst the meeting is taking place. Filming during any breaks or elsewhere in the building is not permitted. We're not expecting a fire drill, but in the event that there is a fire alarm, please exit via reception and follow everyone across the Great Hall. Toilet facilities can be found to the right when you leave the hall. There is a hearing loop, and which the room is fitted with, and which is infrared loop, and it's permanently switched on. You will need either a neck loop if you use a hearing aid, or headphones for amplified sound. Both are available on request from reception. I'd like to welcome all members to this meeting, as well as the executive members, and we have 6 members of the Cabinet here today, so thank you all for attending, and also those who are observing online. And I'd particularly like to thank all our councillors who are here to speak today, of whom we have 7 at this as speakers today, and I'm very grateful for them taking the time to come and do that. Members, we have a busy agenda, and it's therefore important that we make the most efficient and effective use of the time available. Please, can I therefore ask members once again to be succinct in both your questions and contributions to the debate, so that all members have an opportunity to contribute to the scrutiny of the items in the time available. If members want to propose amendments to the recommendation, I would appreciate it if you could make your proposed amendments known at the start of the debate. However, if an amendment arises out of the debate, it can still be introduced at a later stage. I want to remind all members that any amendments should be in writing and must be proposed and seconded. When it comes to voting, we will take any proposed amendments in reverse order and then vote on the substantive recommendations. I will say some more about amendments when I get to the relevant point later in the meeting. If we move straight on to the agenda today, the first one is apologies for absence. Katie, do we have any apologies for absence?
Thank you, Chairman. We've received apologies for absence from Councillor Rupert Curl, and we have Councillor Malcolm Wade in attendance as a substitute member. We've had apologies from Councillor Tim Groves, and Councillor Martin Todd is in attendance as a substitute member. We also have apologies from Councillor Sarah Pankhurst, and Councillor Malcolm Wallace is in attendance as a substitute member. We also have apologies from Councillor David Drew and Councillor Barry Dunning.
Thank you very much. Item 2, declarations of interest. Members are welcome to disclose any declaration of interest when we get to the main item. Item 3, deputations. Somewhat surprisingly, we have no public deputations to the meeting, but we do have, as I said, 7 county councillors who wish to speak, and I will invite them up to the lectern individually. The Select Committee has also received several written representations. Thank you all for those who have written to us as well. We will take your views into consideration. The councillors going to speak in this order are Councillor Mark Cooper, Councillor Alex Crawford, Councillor Lance Quantrill, Councillor Andy Tree, Councillor Tim Davis, Councillor Bill Withers, and Councillor Jackie Porter. We will put the timer on. All the councillors will have 7 minutes. They've all kindly assured me they won't take 7 minutes, but the timer is on should they overrun, just to remind them that it is 7 minutes. So we have Councillor Mark Cooper going first, followed by Councillor Alex Crawford. So Mark, if you wish to go up the lectern, please. But before you do that, I would also like to welcome the leader who has walked in. So we now have, I think, all 7 members of the Cabinet, or 6 members of the Cabinet here today. Thank you.
Right. Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, colleagues. Thanks for allowing me to speak. I am here, as you may imagine, to defend the existence of Casbrook Common, which is the HWRC for the Romsey area. I've received a number of representations, not just this current consultation period, but over the years, to maintain it as an open site. Now, you all know that it's a Tier 3 site, it's in your agenda, and its limitations are recognised, especially when compared with locations like Eastleigh and Winchester. which are alternative HWRCs for Romsey residents. The Eastleigh site is 5 miles from Romsey, so it's a 10-mile round trip. The Winchester site is 14 miles away, so a 28-mile round trip. So despite its small size, Casbrook Common is a busy and popular site. And the implication of its closure is that Romsey residents will have to travel further to dispose of their household waste items. Now, the cumulative carbon footprint of those numerous longer car journeys will be very significant county-wide. And it's not going to help this county achieve carbon neutrality. The implications for the low-lying areas of our coastal county of runaway climate change continues and does not bear thinking about. The cost of developing our coastal flood defences would far outweigh the short-term savings of closing some HWRCs, literally thousands to one. We as administrators have a duty to facilitate behavioural change so that we can at least attempt to rein in climate change. There is also the concern shared by many of my residents that there will be an increased propensity to fly tip if the HWRCs are not localised. Then the costs are borne by landowners and, more commonly, by the district authorities. So, members, closing Casbrook Common impedes the county's progress to carbon neutrality, and it transfers the cost of fly tipping to other people and to district authorities. I would urge colleagues to consider these additional cost factors when coming to your recommendations to Cabinet. Cost cutting by us that generates more costs for others is not something a responsible public body, this county council, should be doing. Nor should it be our role to make decisions that mean achieving net zero becomes an ever more distant and unachievable goal. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Mark Cooper. The next councillor to speak is Councillor Alex Crawford. Alex. Can you turn your mic on, please?
Okay, I expected it to be on after the last speaker. Excuse me. I've got several apologies to make. The first one being that I anticipated that I would myself be able to propose an amendment, but unfortunately that rests with the members of the committee only. Therefore, I had circulated in advance to all the members the kind of thing I had wanted to say in an amendment, and I will just go through one or two of those points. If I may. The most important point of all is that we need to exclude the Aldershot tip, as we call it, and from the proposals for closure until there's been a full evaluation of a future site, because part of the future development plan for the Wellesley development, which is a development of some nearly 4,000 houses, which is in progress at the moment, and about 1,500 of them are currently occupied. And part of the provision of that is that part of the site will include a new modern HWRC for the whole of Rushmore. And that was part of the master plan agreed between Hampshire, Rushmore Borough Council and Granger, the developer, as well as the Ministry of Defence, on whose land Wellesley was built. Originally, this proposal was anticipated to, if you like, be up and running by 2027. So what we need to do, I would say, is have an evaluation of that project. Where's the finance coming from, what the timescale will be, and how it will be implemented. The land is available, it's been allocated. It's simply a case of getting on with it. I would also say that this is part of the rapid expansion of Rushmore, which has to be catered for. So I would just say that, as I mentioned, this Wellesley development is a further 2,400 houses to come there. But already as part of that, we've seen the expansion of Rushmore population in the past 10 years by 10,000 people. The 2011 census was 90,000 people in Rushmore. There are now 100,000, and with the prospects for future expansion, we could be looking at 120,000 in 20 years' time. And we have that with the prospect of the further 2,400 homes on Wellesley. There's a further 800 homes currently with planning permission in Aldershot Town Centre, and that would involve, those two together would involve another 10,000 population within the next 10 years. And then, of course, under the current government proposals, our allocation for future housing is a further 3,000 homes in the next 5 years. So again, that would be a further 10,000 on top of that. So Rushmore is in for a huge expansion, and therefore it makes no sense to close an Aldershot tip before there's a new tip for the whole of Rushmore on the Wellesley site. And also, it would be able to cope with additional demand from the parts of Eastern Hart, which would then be closer to the new site on the Wellesley development. There's a couple of, well, 2 or 3 other points that are minor points, really, but really, it was said that the Aldershot tip was less than 7 miles from the Farnborough tip, but that's where the Aldershot tip is. Some parts of Aldershot are much further than 7 miles. So, for example, where I live and where Councillor Withers lives is 7.5 miles, which is out with what you would consider the non-statutory guidelines for how far it should be between tips. Also, the current users of the Farnborough tip, they complain about the difficulties of getting suitable appointments. Also, the Farnborough tip has a narrow access road, and it already becomes congested with the current usage. And I think that's probably enough said. So I look forward to perhaps having another amendment coming forward that will deal with these points so that we can look to the future with some confidence. Thank you very much, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Crawford. The next speaker is Councillor Lance Quantrill. Lance.
Thank you very much, Chairman, Councillors, Officers. My name is Lance Quantrill. I'm the County Councillor for Hayling Island. I'm going to share some information with you about the local situation, and I'm going to offer you a solution. I haven't done a PowerPoint presentation, and I'm not allowed to use props, but imagine I am Hayling Island. I am a triangle. I am 5 miles from here.
Lance, can you possibly stay by the microphone because it is being recorded? Thank you.
I'm 5 miles from here to here, and along the base, I'm 5 miles as well. I'm bordered by loads of local authorities. Isle of Wight is down here, Portsmouth City Council is here, Havant Borough Council is here, Chichester District Council is here, West Wittering Parish Council is here, West Sussex is over there, and you are Normandy. That's important. Where my knees are is about below that 85% of the population, 17,513, and they live in that section along the bottom. The Fishery Lane household waste recycling is by my left knee. Up here, above where if I had a halo, it would be Broadmarsh, Havant, would be the next best alternative. And although that's less than the 7 miles, there is a reason why, which I'll explain, you may consider the proposition I'm going to put to you. Along my feet, there are 7 public toilets and an extra one in the summer. And that's important too, because there is one road off from my feet to my head. It's an island. There is a bridge which travels off here. When traffic volumes increase because of the visitors coming to visit the toilets and also the beachlands, there are road delays. We get a lot of tourists, lots. And that's great for Hampton Borough Council because they take hundreds of thousands of pounds in parking fees. And we love them because they all spend money, and that's good enough for the businesses too. There's a psychological barrier which is going off the island. I'm going to fringe on things. This is our local newspaper, the Hayling Herald. It's free, it's delivered locally by residents. It comes out once a month. And 3 years ago, I'm sure the traffic officers will remember, we had Storm Kieran in February. We had a westerly wind, we had low pressure, and we had a high tide. The bridge was flooded. And the Hayling Herald, I was expecting to have a headline saying, Storm Kieran closes Hayling Bridge, Hampshire cut off. That's not as funny as you found it, because that's the psychological difference between living on Hayling Island and thinking you're going to travel off to go to Broadmarsh in Havant, which is up here. Closure will mean that the volume for those 2 reasons I've given you won't transfer to Broadmarsh. So our Hampshire County Council targets for recycling are unlikely to see that volume transferred from Hayling Island to Broadmarsh. It still leaves us with the problems of the cost of retaining it. And 54% of the utilisation of the slots are utilised. So half the slots, the time slots on the booking service at Hayling Island are not used. So here's my compromise. Why not open it for 4 days a week? If you do that, Hayling Island will go from bottom 5 used sites to within the top 5. And the reason I can be sure of that is because I put out a survey. I've had 271 responses, and everybody has come back to say, here's my preferential days. Now, there's some work to be done with the Excel spreadsheet formula, but it means that people will travel on 4 days a week to deliver their refuse, which they would have taken 7 days. And the efficiency will go up. Fixed costs, I realise, are the same, but the marginal difference could make the difference between keeping that volume for recycling, satisfying the residents, and as Councillor Cooper said, reducing the chance of fly tipping. So there's my appeal. Please keep the household waste recycling open at Hayling Island. Open it for 4 days a week, and I'm sure we can encourage increased recycling as well as the same number of visits. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Quantrill. The next speaker is Councillor Andy True. Andy.
Good morning. Can you all hear me okay? Brilliant. So good morning, Chairman, committee members, cabinet members, officers and everybody else in the room. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to address you this morning. I'm not going to attempt to turn East Hampshire into a triangle, so my speech might not be quite as entertaining as the previous one. Today I am speaking to you as County Councillor for Whitehall, Borden and Linford, also noting my role as leader of the Whitehall and Borden Community Party, as it is my firm duty to represent the views of residents in my division. When I first read the published draft report to Cabinet, the section on Borden and some of the stats actually reinforce why the Borden Household Waste Recycling Centre should stay open. And so I was perplexed when I got to the end and a statement read, "It is considered that the Borden Household Waste Recycling Centre should remain within the proposals for closure being recommended within the report." I draw your attention to the following paragraph from the report itself, which I will read. A total of 1,233 respondents to the consultation forum selected Borden as their usual household waste recycling centre, which is the highest number of any proposed Tier 3 site. Half of all free text responses focused on the significant house building in the Whitehall and Borden area and the impact this demand would have on alternative sites. Many considered that a driving distance of 7 miles was too far on inadequate roads, particularly between Borden and Alton, and that the closure of both Borden and Petersfield household recycling centres would create a substantial service gap. It was noted that longer journeys could be detrimental for the environment, with fly tipping in the local countryside a key concern. Less Borden users than average were supportive of reduced hours, 38% versus 44%, and 96% disagreed with closures. I also draw your attention to these statistics. 21%, just over 1 in 5, said that they would not visit a household waste recycling centre if Borden was closed. Whilst I'm not suggesting that these law-abiding citizens would fly tip instead, statistically the risk has to surely go up, and the cost is then borne by the District Council. 32% of respondents who used Petersfield Household Waste Recycling Centre said they would use Borden as an alternative if theirs was closed. Therefore, it is clear that closing both sites would be detrimental to residents across East Hampshire who Hampshire County Council should be serving. Referencing what I said earlier, is that the report itself describes a concern over a substantial service gap. I first published my personal objections to the suggestion that Borden Household Waste Recycling Centre could close on 17th of January 2024. The report references the resident-initiated petition that I personally handed in, which received 3,316 signatories. I thank all residents who signed it so I can share their support with you today and their views. The leader of East Hampshire District Council, Councillor Richard Millard, published a statement jointly with me in my capacity as Deputy Leader of EHDC on the 18th of January that read, "We do not want to see the closures of Petersfield and Borden household waste recycling centres, especially as we want to see recycling increased. We encourage all East Hampshire residents to respond to the HCC consultation to ensure our voice is heard, and I'm pleased that so many residents did respond." Conservative Damien Hines MP, one of the MPs that covers our district, has advised me that he is entirely aligned with that position. During the general election, the Lib Dem prospective parliamentary candidate for Farnham and Borden constituency publicly called for the proposed cuts to be urgently reassessed and that Borden Household Recycling Centre should remain open. The winner of that contest, the new Conservative MP for Farnham and Borden constituency, Greg Stafford, launched his own campaign as a prospective parliamentary candidate on 11th of February to save Borden Household Waste Recycling Centre, saying, "Together we can make sure it stays open." Although not submitted to be in this report, I understand he received about 600 responses that were against closing the recycling centre, which I have been advised was 100% of those who responded. Residents then elected him. Whilst I'm sure it comes as no surprise that our local MPs and local councillors are united on campaigning for issues such as this that matter to local residents, I would ask you to consider the special circumstances of Whitehill and Borden and why I believe this household waste and recycling centre should remain open, linking back to what I have referenced on the report itself. Much of what I'm about to say I put in a letter to the leader, now former leader of Hampshire County Council, in a letter dated 18th of March during the public consultation period. Whitehill and Borden is a particularly special case. We were a military town for around 100 years, and after the withdrawal and relocation, we were told by those in power that the town would be regenerated and that this would be a positive step forward. So far, of the 2,400 homes that have been given outline planning permission on MOD land, only about 500 have been completed, and they still have some way to go along with the new town centre creation. Over 600 additional homes are currently proposed by the EHDC draft local plan, and as we know, such housing numbers may go up following announcements by the new Labour government. Residents are concerned about infrastructure and facilities, and I put to you that the closure of the Borden Household Waste Recycling Centre would be a very regressive step in terms of Hampshire County Council supporting our community and demonstrating its commitment to the regeneration of Whitehill and Borden. I believe that keeping the Whitehill and Borden Household Waste Recycling Centre fully open would send a strong and positive signal to my fellow residents and the neighbouring divisions, such as my colleague Councillor Debbie Curnow-Ford, who represents Headley, Greyshot and Liphook, that Hampshire County Council does care about playing its part in supporting our wider community in terms of the infrastructure and facilities and supporting recycling. Finally, I want to put on record my support for the staff who work at Borden Household Waste Recycling Centre and others across the county. To have the uncertainty of seeing all of this must be very difficult, and I thank them for all their work. I hope this cross-party committee will consider carefully the arguments that are put forward, and I implore you to recommend to Cabinet that Borden Household Recycling Centre stays fully open with long-term commitment to you. And I will add that this has made front page news in our town today, which shows the media view this is an important issue. And I've received correspondence from residents as recently as this morning asking me what they can do to help to try and make sure this facility stays open. Thank you very much for listening. And I've literally got to 0 just as the clock ticked. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Councillor Tree. Well kept the time. The next contributor is Councillor Tim Davis. Tim.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, members of the committee, for giving your time to listen to me. I'm not going to be as long or as eloquent, perhaps, as some of the other speakers. I represent an extremely rural part of the county. There is a large town within my division, Yateley, although I only represent half that. The rest of it is very spread out, very thinly populated, and is a long way, far more than 7 miles from the alternatives to the Hartley-Whitney Refuse Centre. I would say merely that the one issue that one finds mentioned more often than almost anything else when one's out on the doorstep is the future of the waste centre at Hartley-Whitney. If that goes, life will be very, very difficult for anybody who represents the division at Winchester. They will be blamed, or rather Hampshire County Council will be blamed for a severe reduction in the facilities offered to residents. We do have other waste recycling centres in the area. We have one, for example, in Woking. Unfortunately, that's across the border in Berkshire and is therefore not open for residents of Hampshire to use. Parts of my division are bordered on both either Berkshire or Surrey. They can't use sites in Berkshire or Surrey because they're not residents in Berkshire or Surrey. There is there's plenty of scope to actually redesign the existing tip. There's space at the back where it could be rebuilt. I recognise that Hartley is, relatively speaking, rather backward in the sense that people actually have to climb up to put their stuff in. There's no reason that I was told when we rebuilt the roundabout on the A30 that was going to be a site for a new tip. That hasn't happened. I feel very disappointed. I feel sure that my residents feel absolutely devastated by the prospect of this one closing. People have mentioned the prospects of there being fly tipping. I recognise that fly tipping is acts of a criminal mind. However, I feel that it's likely that it will increase if we close that because the alternatives are simply too far away. I would urge, therefore, that you reconsider the closure of the tip in Hartley-Whitney. Thank you very much for listening to me.
Thank you, Councillor Davis. The sixth speaker is Councillor Bill Withers. Bill.
Chairman, members, the Cabinet and public. I am Bill Withers, the County Councillor for Aldershot South Division in Rushmore. My colleague, Councillor Crawford, has already spoken this morning and has given you our views on what is happening with the Farnborough Household Waste Recycle Centre and its limits in meeting any future requirement should the Aldershot site shut. He also spoke about the expansion, regeneration of not only Aldershot town, but the MOD land into the Wellesley estate run by Grangers, bringing 3,500 up to 4,000 houses by 2035-36, which was due to be completed by 2028. So it is an ever-growing not only local town, but also a commuter town. It has an airport, it has aircraft technology, and the expansion of the businesses in that area are growing all the time. Aldershot has a population at this moment in time which has grown to 39,807 and is expected to grow by another 10,000 in the next 10 years. As stated, Rushmore Borough has expanded to 100,000 and mirrors the growth that is happening in Hampshire in general. And the population continues not only to grow with youth, but also with older people. And as we all know, the older people are living longer and require physical activity and well-being to prevent any further stress on our other facilities, the NHS within the county. So it is important that we keep people active. You would have noted in the officer's report that it says there was an agreement in place with Dorset and West Sussex councils to allow residents to access Hampshire waste recycle centres in return for an annual financial contribution. It doesn't mention that there is an agreement with the residents of Surrey, Ash, Ashvale, Ash Green, Tongham, Weyburn and Badshot Lee to use the Aldershot Centre, costing £5 a visit. So you need to understand that Aldershot is the 30th largest urban area in the UK, covering 243,344 residents. Therefore, the retention of the Aldershot Centre to both county councillors in Aldershot is critical, and the residents have voted that they want it to be retained. Rushmore Borough councillors have voted for it to be retained, and we ask the county to ensure that that Tier 3 site is retained to the time when the new project on the Wellesley estate has a new purpose-built waste recycle centre with good access and egress, not only to Aldershot, Fleet and Farnborough and the other areas I've just mentioned, but also across the 331 to the surrounding area. And we hope through the amendment that is going to be proposed today that you will support the retention of the Tier 3 sites. Thank you very much, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Withers. And our seventh and final speaker today is Councillor Jackie Porter. Jackie.
Thank you very much, committee. I'm standing up for my town in the Itchen Valley, which is New Alresford. It's fully functioning and sustainable. It has a doctor's surgery, a bus service for 7 days a week. It's near the cycle route 23, has preschool provision, infant and junior and secondary school provision, library, dentist, pharmacy, station, even 2 undertakers. It's birth to death. It has multiple employment sites and the HWRC is one of those. It's the very model of a 20-minute neighbourhood, a completely sustainable town. Hampshire County Council promotes LTP4, vision-led planning, reducing the need to use personal motorised vehicles, the car. This proposal will damage that vision and mission. Many residents in this village or in this town do not need a car to live well here, and this site, in the midst of a council housing area, has managed to retain a walk or wheel-in facility, albeit for just 2 hours a week. So if this is closed, what will they do? You can't really take your recycling to Winchester or Alton on a bus, and it would cost them more money. They'd have to pay at least £2 each way on the bus and walk assistance, so equalities is an issue here. Returning to LTP4, why take away an HWRC, which is also a walk-in service, if only for 2 hours a week, when this community is using more public transport day by day, needing less car travel? It seems to be going backwards. This community, this town is sustainable and growing. Out-of-town users use it too. There's also a practical difficulty with travelling to Winchester, their next nearest HWRC, which will be difficult and likely to suffer delays for the next 3 years. whilst M3 Junction 9 is being upgraded. The work is due to start mid-October, so it's really happening now. If those works start, we know that there will be a number of delays around that area, and it will create another problem, particularly for older people who don't actually know the roads particularly well around there, and they will have to start using those roads too. So I am asking, therefore, on behalf of all Alresford and HWRC users in the Alresford area, whether living in Alresford or in the rest of my division of the Itchen Valley, to retain this site, at least until after the M3 Junction 9 works are complete. To do this efficiently, it's clear from the consultation responses that less days open are much more popular than the option of complete closure. I'm sure they would not welcome that, but they would be content with less days open, but at least an HWRC right there in their community. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Porter. It's been an indication of the strength of feeling amongst our fellow councillors. We've had 7 of them give up some of their time this morning to attend this meeting. So I'm very grateful to all 7 of you for doing that. I think the grateful for that. I'm going to move on to item 4, Chairman's announcements. I've got no announcements you'll be glad to hear apart from what we're discussing today. Just to let you all know that we have had several amendments, and we will probably be taking a break at the appropriate time for the amenders to discuss whether they can be combined into one, as we did in our previous meetings. We've also got the working group report. We've had it before. I'm going to ask Councillor Jackie Branson to once again report on the working group as its chair and tell us their views on the process. So, Councillor Branson.
Thank you very much, Chairman. The Working Party Group is before you on page 25 of the agenda, and it was the result of conscientious work by the whole panel from all parties. What I would like to emphasise is that we spent a lot of time looking at and considering all the contributions from organisations and individuals to the public consultation. Although none of us were elected to make these savings, we all wanted to ensure that the effect on our residents would be mitigated as much as possible. However, if you look at the report on page 34 to 35 of the agenda and the recommendations A to J, you realise that as well as many of our residents, the Working Party had a number of reservations about the recommendations from the draft Cabinet report. Therefore, I will be proposing an amendment. I think we were all concerned about the effect of unintended consequences from the closure of any of the recycling centres, including those listed in the report.
Thank you, Councillor Branson. Now moving on to item 5, the meat of today's meeting, which is the pre-scrutiny of the SP25 savings proposal on the Household Waste Recycling Centre. I'm going to introduce Patrick Blogg to present the stream and the appendices to us today. Patrick.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning, members. So there is one principal item that I will cover today, Appendix 7 of the Cabinet report, which is the savings proposals for household waste and recycling centres, or HWRCs. This is included under cover of a brief introductory report from me. Additionally, also included in the documents is a draft report for Cabinet on the 14th of October. This report includes the appendix I've just mentioned and also the other 6 Universal Services proposals, all of which have been presented to you at the previous Universal Services Select Committees. Now, I was not proposing to go through the draft Cabinet report as it is there for information, but I would flag the contextual information within that sets out the budget context against which we have had to prepare these proposals. Now, this is included in paragraph 9, which includes the sentence, "Whilst further, more detailed work needs to be undertaken, it is likely that the County Council will face a revised budget gap of at least £175 million before accounting for the SP25 savings, which is a £43 million increase on the previous £132 million for the next financial year." It is against this backdrop my Directorate has prepared 7 proposals that have been consulted on, and I will now introduce the final one of these for consideration by members today. I'm going to present Appendix 7 of the draft Cabinet report on proposals for the Household Waste and Recycling Centres, or HWRCs. The report contains 4 recommendations. The first is to note the outcome of the 2024 Future Services consultation in relation to the proposals on the future of the Household Waste and Recycling Centres network. The next recommendation is to approve the approach for the removal of up to £1.6 million budget provision for waste and resource management detailed within the report to move the service towards the legal minimum service level, taking into account statutory obligations and statutory and non-statutory guidance. The third recommendation is to implement closure of HWRCs in Tier 3 and Tier 4 as detailed in Table 1 under paragraph 23, on a structured, phased basis to achieve the savings and move towards a legal minimum service level. The final recommendation provides delegated authority to make any necessary arrangements and implement decisions on a phased basis, as well as consideration of the viability and legal basis of any alternative operating models for closed sites. I'm now going to present a brief summary of the main content of the paper. The County Council provides 24 household waste and recycling centres across the county. This is a greater network than anywhere else in the UK. It has an annual budget of over £10 million and was therefore included as a key area for potential budget savings for SP25, the backdrop of which I've mentioned earlier. 5 options were consulted on in the Future Services consultation in January 2024. These included charging for discretionary services where legally possible, implementing alternative delivery models, changing the types of materials accepted at HWRCs, reducing site opening days or hours, and rationalising the size of the network. Other than the requirement in the Environmental Protection Act 1990, there are no further statutory guidelines on the way in which the HWRC service should be provided, aside from regulatory requirements set out by the Environment Agency. Non-statutory guidance on recommended drive times and distances and optimal site capacities is available and was used to inform the proposals. Further details are in paragraphs 27 to 31 of the paper, which includes the duties the County Council has in respect of the Environmental Protection Act, and also the non-statutory guidance provided by the Waste and Resources Action Programme, or WRAP, which is provided to local authorities and outlines best practice provision for HWRC networks. Information is also included in the paper on the government proposals on simpler recycling that, whilst not directly affecting HWRCs, should increase the amount of recyclable household waste collected at the curbside and therefore free up space in residents' residual waste bins. Further details on simpler recycling are still awaited from government. You will see within the paper that each HWRC has been reviewed and ranked against a set of criteria to determine the most efficient and effective sites in the network. From this, each one has been allocated to one of 4 tiers, with Tier 1 being the largest, most cost-effective strategic sites, through to the smallest, least value for money sites in Tier 4. More than 10,000 responses were received to the HWRC proposals in the Future Services consultation. There was general dissatisfaction with the proposals, with key themes highlighted for concern, including a perception that fly tipping would increase as a result of proposals, increased air pollution, and a worry that alternative sites would be unable to cope with the increased demand. Now, it is worth noting that there is no evidence to suggest that changes to the HWRC service would lead to an increase in fly tipping, which is not the experience from other local authorities who have closed sites or reduced opening hours. Fly tipping is a criminal offence, and our experience in Hampshire suggests that fly tipping is mainly carried out by criminal organisations looking to avoid charges for disposal, rather than directly by householders. We will, however, to continue to focus on ways to reduce fly tipping, such as through the Hampshire Fly Tipping Strategy and Action Plan, which we are delivering in partnership with a number of public and private sector organisations. You will see in the table in paragraph 67 the principal concerns raised in the consultation, along with detailed responses against these from the County Council. The proposals originally set out in the consultation accounted for a minimum saving of £1.2 million. However, following the consultation and further analysis, including consideration of the move towards a legal minimum service level, the potential savings have been revised to £1.6 million, which is achievable through the recommendations proposed, and importantly, would still provide an HWRC service within the guidelines. Through detailed analysis, the County Council is clear in that only closures of the HWRCs in the proposed tiers 3 and 4 can achieve the necessary move towards legal minimum service level, as the other options are either prohibited in legislation or insufficient on their own or in combination to move towards that level. Whilst the recommendation would result in a reduction in the current provision, the proposal would still ensure Hampshire is within the legal duty and recommended guidelines outlined in the non-statutory advice. Reviewing site and performance data, it is also considered that the remaining sites would still be able to meet the expected demand. It is anticipated that closures could commence from summer 2025 onwards on a phased and planned basis. The County Council is also clear that it remains open, where practicable, to consider approaches from external organisations interested in alternative delivery models for sites at risk of closure, providing that the required savings can still be achieved and that the County Council does not retain an administrative or legal responsibility linked to its statutory waste disposal obligations. The County Council acknowledges the level of disagreement with the range of proposed options to make savings from the HWRC network. In particular, the high level of disagreement with a proposal to reduce the number of HWRCs is clear from the consultation responses. However, against the financial backdrop of the financial position I've outlined earlier, to achieve the level of savings and efficiencies proposed and move towards a minimum service level, legal minimum service level, the most appropriate recommendation that can be presented to Cabinet, while still meeting non-statutory guidelines on HWRC provision, is to implement a programme of closures for those sites categorised into Tier 3 and Tier 4. Whilst other options offer potential to support the savings in the future, in isolation, or in some cases a combination thereof, they would not deliver the quantum of savings proposed. It is important to recognise that this recommendation still places the county's HWRC network within all non-statutory guidelines for meeting resident demand in terms of capacity and proximity. A phased or staggered implementation from 2025 would ensure the service can adapt such that the impact of the changes are minimised and communicated effectively. These are the key points from my introduction. I'm joined with me today by James Potter, Assistant Director for Waste and Environmental Services, and Sam Horn, Head of Statutory Services in James's branches area, and we'd be happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Patrick, and thank you for the work that the officers have done on the report. It's very detailed and we're very grateful for that. At this point, I'm going to invite committee members to put forward questions to Mr. Blogg and the other officers on the report, and then we'll go into the issue of amendments and then have the debate. So questions first. Councillor Todd, you're first.
I have quite a lot of questions. I don't know how many I'm allowed to go at in one go.
Let's do 2 by 2 to start off with.
Okay,
well, I've got first two, then we'll let everyone else.
Two topics that I want to go after. The first one is mileage, and the second one is capacity. Now, on mileage, I've gone and read the RAP guideline, and it doesn't say that the limit is 7 miles. So what it says is, in light of the above data, the following points suggest reasonable minimum levels of HWRC provision, with some exceptions for very rural or very urban areas. Maximum catchment radii for a large proportion of the population, 3 to 5 miles, brackets, very rural areas, 7 miles. Maximum driving times for the great majority of residents in good traffic conditions, which is the phrase referred to, 20 minutes, brackets, very rural areas, 30 minutes, and then it talks about the inhabitants per HWRC. So if you, for example, are assessing Bishop's Waltham closure and saying that people drive to Eastleigh, which is about 7 miles, I think, do you think that's a very rural drive? That's my question, which is, are we actually assessing against the right criteria, and have we done an assessment against the RAP criteria as written in their document? So that's my first question. The second thing relates to capacity, and there's a contradiction here between the paper we have in front of us and Appendix 3 of the consultation, which showed some different figures. So paragraph 13 says it is considered that the remaining sites would still be able to meet the expected demand. And that's all we have in front of us today. But if you go back to the original consultation paper and look at Appendix 3, it says that if you close Tier 4, that, for example, Hedge End and Farnborough go above 100% of capacity. And if you close tiers 3 and 4, and this ties into the point made by Councillor Tree, Alton, Farnborough and Netley all go above 100% above capacity. And that's not a coincidence given what's been talked about in terms of the pressures in Alresford and Bishop's Waltham and Fair Oak. Certainly for Alton and Netley, those are the two that you would expect to be under pressure. So I'd like some clarity as to what's changed between the capacity analysis that was done for the consultation and the paper that's in front of us today, and in particular, has the mileage implications of certain of those HWRCs going over capacity being factored into the mileage analysis and how that relates to the RAP recommendations.
Thank you, Councillor Todd. Patrick, would you like to try and answer those two questions?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Todd, for your questions. Quite technical of their nature, those questions, so what I'm going to do is hand over to Sam Horn, who's going to pick up those points. But what I would say just before I do is that a considerable amount of work has been done looking at the RAP guidance, the non-statutory guidance, and working out the analysis through that. We've done a large amount of modelling associated with it, and the guidance has been adhered to through that time. But I'll hand over to Sam, who can pick up those very specific points. Thank you.
Thank you, Patrick. So to take the first question, the mileage question, we have used the 7 mile guidance as the maximum distance that we would adhere to. So from our perspective, we hadn't used the 3 to 5 mile. We've used the 7 miles as the maximum driving distance for any individual. With regards to the capacity, you're right. Based on the analysis of the existing capacity that we have in the system, based on the current booking system, a number of sites would go over the 100%. However, the benefit of the booking system is it does allow us to flex capacity to suit demand. So we would be able to increase the demand at peak times at those sites to manage the additional capacity that is available.
Councillor Todd, do you want to have a follow-up on that, on those two specific issues?
So I think it's helpful for the committee to be clear that the analysis in front of us isn't consistent with the mileage guidelines done by RAP. And on capacity, so this actually ties into a second point that I think requires a bit more exploration, which is about hours and days, because the assessment that was made on on hours and days, I mean, the views of residents was absolutely clear. 44% of residents want to reduce hours or days, 8% reduce sites, closing more sites with no reductions in hours and days, only received 3% of support overall, more support for closing HWRCs on certain days of the week. So if we can flex capacity, and bizarrely, the paper only talks about reducing hours in terms of the cost implication, although, again, the original consultation talked about the impact of closing days. But given that it was the most popular option and the one that the public wanted us to do, why is there not a tiered proposal for days of the week that might be closed? Or even if you read the RAP guidance, they talk about temporary HWRCs, so even possible seasonal closures in certain cases in terms of ways of managing. That's the preferred option for residents. Sorry, there's another point on capacity while we're at it. The NPPF has increased Hampshire's housing targets by 71%. So they've gone from 5,885 houses a year to 10,071. And the assessment that was originally done talked about future housing within catchment, but presumably, is that based on granted permissions? Is it based on local plans? Is it based on the previous NPPF? What's that based on? And have you properly assessed that? So the seasonality, why hasn't there been a proper proposal in line with what residents asked for about day-based closure rather than hour restrictions? And have you reflected the NPPF in capacity, aside from the three that we've talked about that are over capacity?
Thank you. Patrick.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Todd, for your follow-up questions. Can I just go back to my opening statements about the budget position for the County Council? We face a £175 million gap, which I've mentioned before at this select committee and all the other select committees. And as a result of that, we've had to look really critically at all our proposals and look where we can to move towards a legal minimum service level. And you'll see within the paper set out that actually options were looked at, the different options for opening hours, for times that they could stay open, and various modelling assessments were done for that. But it really is only the proposed closures of Tier 3 and Tier 4 that move us anywhere towards the legal minimum service level. And the other point I would make is that you'll see we have the greatest number of HWRCs across the country in Hampshire, and that's why we've had to look quite carefully. But in respect of the more detail of the questions, if I may, I'm going to hand over to Sam again, who can pick up those points. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, so in relation to the housing targets and development that you've mentioned, we based all of our analysis on the known proposed developments at time. So that was ones that were both consented and also ones that were in the works. So some of the housing developments, large housing developments, which weren't consented at the point that we did the analysis, were included. So we used the small area population forecast and housing development associated with that to include in it. As Patrick has mentioned, we did look at all of the issues related to opening hours options, both day closures and hour reductions, including seasonality. But as Patrick has stated, we don't feel they would move us towards the legal minimum service level. And it's worth noting there are some fairly significant costs associated with holding sites, sort of effectively mothballing a site for a period of time and then bringing it back online for a period of time. We also have looked at mobile or sort of temporary HWRCs, as you might call them. Managing these is challenging, where you have to think about environmental permitting regulations, planning restrictions, and also the associated issues with a site that pops up for a short period of time and then disappears, which people tend to view as a place to leave waste, and that it will be collected at some point in the future.
Thank you. The next question is from Councillor Hare. Pal.
Thank you, Chairman. Actually, Councillor Todd has asked my question. My question was about developer contributions. And with the NPPF, changes to the NPPF, there's higher targets of housing, more people, more rubbish. So do we have, I know we don't have any developer contributions presently. Has that been considered? I know you've kind of answered it already.
Patrick.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Hare. I'm just going to hand over to James to answer that question for me.
Thank you, Patrick. Historically, we have tried to attain developer contributions for any large development, and in some places been successful for, should we say, limited, such as sort of we've heard this morning about Aldershot, where sort of some land has been made available. The land's been made available, but not necessarily the cost of construction. And it's always been incredibly difficult to, should we say, demonstrate to the developers what extra chimney pot triggers the requirement for additional waste infrastructure. And therefore they have generally argued backwards on us, and it's been incredibly difficult to sort of generate any reasonable or sensible sort of allocation from developer contributions. But it is always a conversation that we have.
Paul, do you have a follow-up?
Yes, please. So when it goes to planning to the local authorities, and it goes back to Hampshire, and it's always questions about environment, highways, all those. So does that not come within like the environment section? Can you not argue it, or has it not been argued in that case?
We can and we do, but things like education provision and highways provision, etc., are always, should we say, ranked higher within the conversation, and therefore, sort of, should we say, a new HWRC, probably land is going to cost you $1 million to $2 million. The actual construction costs of the site now for sort of, should we say, something like the Eastleigh site is probably in the region of 5 million. So those sorts of costs tend not to get sort of included or get balked at by the developers, but we continue to have those conversations to obtain contributions, but to date it has been very difficult.
The next question is from Councillor Malcolm Wallace. Malcolm. Malcolm Wade, I'm sorry.
I wonder who you meant. Yeah, thank you very much. The great play on this is the 1.6 million. We're asked to make a decision based on that saving, but you haven't told us how much saving the other options would be to compare. Because if you look at any decision, you need to know the pros and the cons. And that will allow us to balance that with the loss to the community. So it'd be, if you could give us that detail, it would be interesting to hear that. Thank you.
Patrick.
Sorry, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Wade. The options, the savings are set out in paragraph 32 of the report, but I think I would just go back to my answer also to Councillor Todd, where we've looked towards a legal minimum service level against the budget gap, and therefore we've had to go for the option and recommend the options forward that takes the highest number of savings associated with that. But we have looked at the other options as well, and they are set out in the report. Thank you.
Malcolm.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I understand that, but we're looking at a collective decision and how we're trying to balance saving money versus public need, and we're clear there's a big public need. And that it looks like you've developed a one-phased approach. Now, I understand we're trying to look at the larger issue, but it's not enough anyway.
I think there was a question in there, but it's obviously a difficult question for Patrick to answer.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor. I think I understand your question about why we haven't put forward different options rather than the option for closure of tier 3 and 4. And again, I think, sorry to reiterate, it's because we've had to move towards a legal minimum service level, and those are the only options that move us towards that. Anything other than that, we are going in increasingly against the RAP guidance and the non-statutory guidance. So the ones that take us as far as we can in terms of the savings that we can make, that still means that we're within the guidance, the non-statutory guidance is what we've had to put forward because of the financial position at the moment. But I absolutely accept that there are other proposals in there, but they don't move us that far. But just to go to your point about balancing the needs of the residents and balancing the needs, what we've done is balance that by staying within the guidance. Thank you.
Councillor Taylor. Kim.
Thank you very much, Chair. Just a couple of quick questions, if I may, sort of following on a little bit, because obviously the proposal that we went out to consultation on had a number of other options. We've discussed some of those options. You've confirmed to us that they wouldn't get us where we would need to go. I think some of the values of those options were in the proposal as well. So, you know, how much we thought we might save if we reduced hours and so on. And clearly they don't come anywhere near this amount. But I would just like some clear confirmation that, because the report is silent on this, and therefore I want to be absolutely clear, that we are no longer pursuing at all and will not pursue some of those proposals, for example, additional charges for discretionary services, and in particular charging people to book using a premium service, and or changes to types of waste, and or reducing operational hours. So I want to be really clear that we are not intending to pursue those.
Patrick.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Taylor. I'm just going to hand to James Potter, who's going to give us some more details on those, please.
Thank you, Patrick. I think it's fair to say that pursuing things like discretionary charges are not on the table now, because they don't, I mean, the response from the general public was they wouldn't use them anyhow, so it's unlikely to do that. I think it's probably up to sort of councillors whether they wish to recommend alternatives such as changes in opening hours or day closures, but the recommendations that officers have been asked to put forward are based sort of on the movement towards legal minimum. Therefore, that's what we put on the table and proposed. So that's where we are.
If there's another question, I'm going to come back to Councillor Todd, who said he had more than two questions. I apologise. Councillor Malcolm Wallace, I do apologise.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I wanted to go back to the guidance. The way the report's written, it very much comes across that we had a target saving to try and achieve, and this is how we're going to achieve it. And then the guidance was looked at secondary. That's the way it comes across in the report. So I'm a little confused about how, that's rather kind of re-emphasised when you actually look at the recommendations. If we go back to the 7 mile one, there's a lot of residents that are going to fall outside that 7 mile barrier, that 7 mile limit. With the proposed close, that includes the whole of Bishop's Waltham, Swanmore, Soberton, Dropsford, Brockbridge, Meon-Stoke, Corhampton, Exton, Warnford, West Meon, vast parts of the Upper Meon Valley, the whole of Petersfield, and large parts of the New Forest. In fact, with the western side of the New Forest, will be 28 miles away from the nearest recycling centre. So I guess my first question is, how can we say we're moving to the legal minimum when we seem to be moving quite a long way beyond it?
Patrick.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Wallace. I think the first thing to say, the savings proposal was never a target. We never opted to look at that as a target. I think what we said in the consultation originally was we would save a minimum of £1.2 million as we explored the options. And what we have done is look at those options, look at the guidance, look at the bits we're bound by against the backdrop of the financial position we find ourselves in, and say, what do we need to take it back to make sure that we can stay within those guidance, stay within our statutory requirements, and what is the figure that comes out of that? And that figure is the £1.6 million. So it was never a target we would aim for and then fit a proposal around the target. It was very much done the other way round. I will hand over to Sam in a second to answer that question on distances, because actually what we've done is done, as I mentioned earlier, a huge amount of modelling for all of the proposals that you see, looking at those driving distances and the travel times. And I'll ask Sam to cover those points, because I think you've given a number of different villages and towns there with distances, and I'll ask Sam to cover that question. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Patrick. Yeah, so the way we've looked at the statutory guidance, so there are 2 points which Councillor Todd really clearly articulated. One was the distance, so the mileage, and the other one was the drive time. So we've used network analysis based on what is an average good journey time on an average day, to be able to establish what that journey time would look like and therefore what the impact on the services would be. And I think you can see from the report and the maps that are included in that, the coverage provides a significant, only a very small proportion of residents within Hampshire, well above 90%, would be within that the drive time allocation that we had. So the guidance is not a 7 miles and a 30-minute, 20 minutes or 30 minutes. It's a 7 mile or, and we've used that as the guidance to track our things around, and therefore the proposals, even with tiers 3 and 4 closing, the majority of residents remain within that drive time that we've said based on the network analysis.
Thank you, Sam. Councillor Todd, you had a follow-up question.
Yeah, well, I was going to make one observation. One of the reasons we have more HWRCs than anywhere else is we're one of the biggest waste authorities in the country. So only Kent has a larger population with a rural character, and the only other ones that are bigger than that are places like Merseyside, which I'm not entirely sure is a very useful comparator. So we shouldn't be totally surprised that we have a lot of HWRCs. In other contexts, we're always very happy to talk about how big we are as an authority, but strangely it's dropped out of the narrative on this particular occasion. The one other area that I'm quite concerned about is carbon. So the RAP guidance says that for every HWRC that closes, you lose 5 to 10% recycling, or just disappears out the system magically, either to appear as fly tipping or presumably to appear in black bins. As contamination, possibly. It's not entirely clear what we're likely to be seeing as a result of this. And then the other thing is, in terms of distance and time, we are talking about LTP4 and trying to, and yet your proposal is for Petersfield, for example, is hit the A3, bomb down there at 70 miles an hour and you can get to Waterlooville in time. Is that consistent with our duties and what we're trying to do to cut carbon? I mean, has there been any assessment? Because frankly, the paragraph that you have in the paper is pretty embarrassing for an authority that is making its argument primarily about recycling levels and distance travelled, both of which are very open to proper analysis on this.
Patrick.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Todd, for your follow-up questions. Just paraphrasing those, there was a question, I think, on the recycling, the 5 to 10% recycling. And again, referring back to the part in the report that I mentioned about some of the information we're awaiting from government on simpler recycling, which will make a difference to recycling at the curbside, which could actually have an impact, a positive impact on HWRCs. The second, on distance and time, I think as mentioned earlier in the report, we've had to work to the guidance that we have, the guidance that's provided to local authorities through RAP and working within that. Of course, there are considerations on travel time, but within that guidance, we've looked at that, looked carefully at what that means, and against the network that we have, making sure that we can still fit within that guidance because it's the best information we have. In terms of the report, the part on the carbon side, Sam, is there anything we can add further on any carbon assessments that are done in terms of travel time?
Thanks, Patrick. No, we haven't been able to model the carbon impacts of the journeys. As you can imagine, we're talking about a significant number of car journeys, and they are unknown car journeys because of the nature of where the waste is arising and then where it's travelling to. So it's not possible to do a detailed carbon analysis of the movements that are happening.
Councillor Todd.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, given that a huge part of the assessment is about drive times and other such things, and presumably modelling, the point made by Councillor Wallace is it isn't just about distance from HWRC to HWRC that needs to be looked at, but the places that are travelling to those HWRCs, and I share his concerns about the Meon Valley. But even if you look at drive time, for example, and unfortunately the maps weren't included in the report, or at least if they were, I didn't see them, but they were included in the original consultation. What we effectively say there is the sort of western end of the New Forest we're just giving up on, essentially, in terms of time, because the map that you have, and I'm not entirely sure it fits with some work I was doing a bit earlier on Google Maps, but it essentially suggests that the sort of the western end of the New Forest we're giving up on. I mean, is that it's not an evenly spread thing. So I just wanted to understand that in a bit more detail.
Patrick.
Oh, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor. No, we're not giving up on it. I think is that point you made. It's not a conversation we've had where we've favoured one area over another. We've applied the guidance consistently across the county. We've looked at the whole network across the county. We've looked at the travel time, and we've modelled all of that. It is not a case that we have picked one area over another and given up on one area. Sam, do you want to pick up any specific points on the Western End, particularly?
Just to flag, yeah, you're right. Under a 20-minute drive time, which is the kind of the shorter drive time, the western edge of the New Forest would be outside of that 20-minute drive time. But with a 30-minute drive time, with tiers 3 and 4 closed, that area is covered within that 30-minute drive time.
One last thing for clarification, just because I think there's a bit of confusion here in terms of what the guidance actually says. The guidance doesn't say it's either 3 to 5 miles for the large proportion of the population, 7 for very rural areas, or maximum drive times. Presumably what they're actually trying to do there as well is capture this issue of carbon, because even in 2018, when this guidance was issued, it was something that was on the agenda. Surely what's going on here is that we're ignoring the bit that would say we design a system that's designed to limit distance travelled, as well as, and doesn't just say, well, we can manage this because we can have people hacking down the M27 and the A3 and the A34 as their way of accessing waste.
Patrick.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Thanks, Councillor. James, do you want to take that one, please?
I think it's fair to say that it's a complex issue. There is also, whilst you're talking about carbon because of travel times, etc., there's also the decarbonisation of travel as people move towards electric cars, etc. So there are sort of benefits there. But you also have the, shall we say, the impact of, you've referenced a reduction in 10% recycling. Where that material goes, it might go into curbside bins, it might go to third-party commercial sites and be recycled there, but it's lost from the household waste system. So I'm not sure we can wholly rely on that. But what we are doing by retaining all of the HWRCs is basically sending a message to residents that it's okay to dispose of absolutely anything at any point that you like, rather than trying to send out waste prevention messages. So in some respects, we're encouraging waste disposal, and that might also be a negative carbon impact.
Thank you. Councillor Wade, Malcolm, you've got another question.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Recent legislation indicates that Hampshire County Council has a legal duty not just to consider the potential impacts to a national park, and I'm talking about New Forest National Park in this case, but to foster the economic and social well-being of them. This doesn't come across in the report at all, and therefore this council could be open to a legal challenge but in not following that legislation. Can you comment on that, please?
Patrick.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Wade. I think we addressed that explicitly in the report, actually. There are 2 paragraphs in there, forgive me. Paragraphs 30 and 31 address that in the report. Thank you.
Are there any other questions?
Chairman, can I just come back on that? So the point I'm trying to make is, you may perceive it does, but the National Park and other organisations do not feel that does. I'm pretty sure about that. There is an immeasurable concern about the impact that this will have on them.
Councillor Todd, do you want to have another question?
Yeah, I was just reminded of an idea that I had discussed with colleagues, and again, it comes back to this days question. So I'm not entirely sure how this might work, but for example, have you looked at the option of having conversations with parishes, for example, where you might restrict the number of days opening and then sort of sell back days to say, well, look, if you want to opt into a better service, you can, but it'll cost you this much.
Sorry, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mr. Todd. We've certainly looked and given the opportunity for others to come forward for sites that are proposed for closure to take on that. And I think I cover in my opening views around making sure, providing we don't retain our administrative and our legal duties as a waste disposal authority. So the option was there for others to come forward. Whether we've looked explicitly at a specific option for parishes, I think you were saying to take on or sell back some time. Sam, is there anything you can add to that one, please? Sorry, I'm not cited on that.
Sorry. Yeah, thanks, Patrick. No, we haven't specifically looked at that as an option. It's worth mentioning that there are some real challenges with the way in which you operate household-based recycling centres, the legislative duty under which you're operating them. So it is something that could potentially be looked at. We haven't looked at it as an option to date, but we'd need to consider it carefully.
Mr. Potter.
Thank you, Chairman. I think also it's worth reminding the committee that actually there is a prohibition on charging for access to HWRCs, and I think that arrangements with parishes might be perceived as such.
Thank you. If there are no more questions, sorry, Councillor Broomfield, Stephen.
Thank you, Chairman. It's a question about alternatives to alternatives, really. Looking at the table on page 61, my concern is the Fair Oak Centre, which is a tier 4. 32% of people who use Fair Oak, if it were to close, would go to Bishop's Waltham. Bishop's Waltham is also tier 4, and 38% of the people who use Bishop's Waltham, were it to close, would go to Fair Oak. So, given that Hedge End is a tier 3, in a worst case scenario, we could close Hedge End as well, and 30% from Bishop's Waltham and 40% from Fair Oak would go to Hedge End. So, I'm trying to pose this as a question, really, because I appreciate the Chairman's, that's what he needs. So the question would be, can you drill down? Is it possible to work out what people's third choice would be if they couldn't go to Fair Oak or to Bishop's Waltham or to Hedge End? Where are they all going to go? And do those fit within your travel times? Thank you.
That's right.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Thanks you, Councillor Broomfield. So the table you reference in the report on page 61 is exactly that. It's the consultation responses, so people's responses to which ones they go. But certainly in terms of the modelling that we did, the modelling has accounted for the fact that if they're in tier 3 and tier 4 and therefore would be proposed for closure, the modelling has assessed the ones that remain open. But Sam, do you want to pick up anything around the specifics of 1, 2 or third choices, please?
Yeah, so the way the modelling has been done is it assesses where someone would go, where we think the likely percentage would go. If that site is then, so say a tier 4 site, we would look at where those people would go. They would be allocated to the associated sites. If then some of those were to a tier 3 site, we've then taken the total, which includes the ones that have been bought from the tier 4 site, if that makes sense, and where they would then go subsequently if that site was closed and neither the tier 3 or tier 4 sites were done. So it's an aggregated process. So we're bringing all of the impacts through to the tier 1 and tier 2 sites, which is why you get an increasing kind of percentage in the impact on the sites that do remain open.
Thank you. If there are no more questions, Councillor Wallace, you have another question.
Kind of following up on the last couple of questions, have you looked at options for opening different sites on different days? I know there's some analysis in the report about cutting down the hours across the board, and that was rejected. But to the example that Councillor Broomfield brought up, if we, for example, opened in Bishop's Waltham for 3 days and then in Fair Oak for 3 days, that would be one team, so it wouldn't be cutting down the hours for the team. We'd still have one team and we'd be keeping both sites open. Has that option been considered?
Patrick.
Thanks, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Wallace. Yes, we looked at different options, and it's a delicate balance where we're looking at days and hours that are closing because of the way it's set up commercially with our operator, which then sometimes passed to third parties. It has to be commercially and economically viable for those third parties for the days it's open as well. But that was certainly modelled as part of our work. Sam, is there anything specific you want to add to that, please?
Not massively, Patrick. We have looked at it. We have had some of those discussions. As Patrick mentioned, there are some challenges commercially with those operations. But we did look at it. We have considered it as part of the overall package and the options. But again, referring back to Patrick's original kind of opening gambit, in terms of where that would take us, we didn't view that would take us to a legal minimum service level.
Thank you. I think that brings an end to the questioning of the officers. The next step is on amendments. We have received 3 written amendments so far, one from Councillor Wallace, one from Councillor Taylor and one from Councillor Branson. And at this point I'm going to take Councillor Wallace, not Councillor Wade, I'm afraid. At this point we have I'm going to take a 5-minute or 10-minute comfort break to see whether we're looking at 1 amendment or 3 amendments and take the procedure there from 4. So we'll be back at 25-2, and if the 2 other proposals come up here and we look at the wording of those 2 amendments and see whether they're separate to the one that Councillor Branson has or whether they can be combined into one, and then we'll proceed from there. So we're taking a 5-minute break at this stage. If we can stop the recording, please. Thank you very much. We are ready to go. We have had an amendment proposed by Councillor Jackie Branson and seconded by Councillor Malcolm Wade. The proposal is on the screen in front of us, and I will ask Councillor Branson to read it out, please.
Thank you, Chairman. I think we have taken consideration of all the deputations by councillors, and they've come up with many valid reasons why their local tip should remain open. Therefore, I propose the following amendment, which I will read out, and it is up on the screen. The Universal Select Committee notes the outcome of the 2024 Future Services consultation in relation to the proposals on the future of the Household Waste and Recycling Centres, the HWRCs network, and disagrees with the report and its recommendations, and asks the Cabinet to consider alternative arrangements keeping Tier 3 and Tier 4 HWRCs open. And the second, the alternative arrangement proposals come back to a future meeting of the Universal Services Select Committee to further scrutinise the outcomes before any recommendations are made to close any HWRC sites in Hampshire.
Thank you, Councillor Branson. I invite members to take part in the debate on this report and this amendment at the same time. Does any councillor wish to make a contribution to the debate? Councillor Parker, you were first, your hand up. Stephen.
Thank you, Chairman. I support this amendment entirely. I think that my views on reading the report in front of us was that it hadn't been properly concluded. If we were to go with the recommendation, we'd be at all fours with the character in Oscar Wilde. Lady Windermere's fan, might have got that wrong, about the chap who knew the price of everything and the value of nothing. Look, I think the value of the HWRCs well exceeds the price that we pay for it. But even when we're talking about trying to save money, and this is why I think the second part of this amendment is so important, is when you look at the table in paragraph 32, which is on page 49, it gives a number of costings on the alternatives. Now, I know you can't just simply tack them all together, much as it might be amusing to do so. But what it does say is we reduce the opening hours to 3 hours less per day. We save £900,000, which is 2/3 of the saving that we were being asked to accept. If we change the types of waste, we're talking about £500,000. If we implement alternative delivery models, we're saving up to £100,000 per site. So if you start adding those together, you find you're getting to the savings that we're looking for without having to close sites. So I know that's simplistic, and I do understand there's more to it than meets the eye. So I'm not suggesting that's a simple result. But I think it does mean we've got to think about this a lot further and a lot more detail to make sure that we don't lose the baby with the bathwater.
Thank you. Councillor Wade.
Thank you, Chairman. I want to address some points that support why I've seconded this motion. I want to talk about something about the New Forest District. It's geographically a large authority of 290 square miles, with approximately 200 miles in a national park, of which 145 square miles are Crown lands managed by Forestry England. It has diverse and distinct communities, many miles apart, with a fragile environment, which already attracts fly tippers. The uniqueness of its geography makes it particularly vulnerable to increased fly tippers. There's been much talk about shutting HWR recycling centres does not increase fly tipping. That depends upon the environment. It is the second largest population of the district or borough in the county, with over 40% of them living in a narrow strip between the National Park and Southampton Water, all within 7 miles of Marchwood Recycling Centre. A statistic statistic in itself which says everything about keeping Marchwood Recycling Centre open. It was been mentioned by earlier members in questioning about the west of the forest. That's on another narrow strip between the National Park, Dorset, and Wiltshire. The residents of Fordingbridge would lead to drive 21.6 miles to Efford, and the nearest of the large communities, Ringwood, is 50 miles to Efford. The A337 is an exceedingly busy road at the moment. It has been developed not far from where the Efford tip is, on the other side of the road. This is increasing the amount of people of driving and increasing the amount of carbon that we're asking our residents to put in the environment. We declared a climate emergency. This is not consistent with getting people out of cars and not putting carbon into the air atmosphere. You know, we have to be consistent. There's much, as I mentioned about recycling, the problem with the New Forest is the fragile environment of the New Forest National Park, with mile upon mile of quiet forest roads through unfenced forest and heathland, with a wide variety of wildlife. And that is threatened by this. This may sound dramatic, but whilst many of our residents will dispose of their recycling by appropriate means, there will be some who will take the short drive to a quiet and leafy lane and leave their waste to be picked up by forest ponies and littering the Crown Forest. We need to look at this from a benefit perspective of the people we're councillors for, which is our residents. The amount of money that this saves does not get the council out of the financial problems it is. There are situations across the county, I particularly like the bit about Haley Island and about Romsey, where there are similar situations that exist in the forest, which I talked about. There are about 21.1 million bookings in 22-23. Think how many extra car journeys we will create by going through the original recommendation. As I said, this is not consistent. I think really on behalf of the residents of the New Forest in particular, and the rest of Hampshire as well, who have equally challenging situations around their recycling, I ask all members to please support this amendment. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Ford.
Thank you, Chairman. I wholeheartedly support this amendment. Residents of my division of Liphook, Headley and Greyshot rely on the Borden Waste Recycling Centre, but they've not been mentioned anywhere in this report. Those residents account for over 40% of the responses to the survey run by Greg Stafford, our new MP, who Councillor Tree referred to. And whilst we border onto the Surrey and West Sussex counties, we just can't nip across the border and use the facilities there. I've noted that residents today from Liphook, Headley, Greyshot have roughly a 7-mile trip to the Borden Recycling Centre. The proposal that they go to Alton, that's going to more than double the journey and the journey time as well. Also, we've got an increase in new homes, as has been referred to in the new legislation. That's also going to increase the additional demand for recycling facilities. But the biggest issue we have with new home building is that the necessary infrastructure lags behind the houses. And here we're being asked to support, previously been asked a recommendation to remove a key facility for residents in East Hampshire. And I'd like to suggest that work is done with recycling prioritised along with infrastructure such as schools and GP surgeries and building of new developments. In Liverpool, we already have issues to fly to the Garden West Mile basis. We have all the lanes along the National Park, MOD, Trust Land, and as has been suggested by Councillor Wade, these areas are frequently used, particularly by opportunistic bicyclists
I believe this problem will be exacerbated by the closure of the Bournemouth Waste Recycling Centre to residents. And of course, that therefore is the district council to do. Thank you. And I call technical alignment for next. I'm just going to
Yeah, we're ready to go. Thank you online for your patience, making sure that you could hear what we were saying in the room. We're going to go back to the debate on this issue, and the next contribution is from Councillor Dominic Hiscock. Dominic.
Thank you, Chairman. What concerns me about these proposals is that it's a short-term solution to a problem which is just not going to go away. We're not going to not have rubbish in the next 25 years or 20 years. The nature of it might change, but it's not going to go away. And what worries me about it is that we're proposing at the moment to close sites, and we've already been told that they can't be mothballed or they'll be expensive to mothball. And my concern would be that we'll never be able to replace them. So we're going to get substantial new building in this area, substantially more people moving in, and they're going to be generating waste occasionally. And I think the nature of the waste recycling centres now is that they're used occasionally. They're not used all the time. They are used occasionally, and it's important that they're there when they're there. And I think people will be very disadvantaged, particularly in the future, if these sites are not available. So therefore I do support this amendment wholeheartedly, and I think we need to think again about whether or not this is the right area to be saving a relatively small amount of money. So thank you.
Councillor Irish, Wayne.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I should be supporting the amendment. I think it's a very, very good solution to this this problem we have with this. But if you take the Fair Oak tip and the Bishop's Waltham tip and the Hedge End tip, you close all those, it means everyone's got to go to Eastleigh. Now we've got a very large development, as Councillor Broomfield will know, One Horton Heath, which will eventually come on site, and that's going to produce a lot more houses, a lot more rubbish will be needing to be got rid of. To drive into Eastleigh, and did it yesterday to drive to Eastleigh. The Fair Oak Road is very busy, very congested. Then when you get through that, you get into Eastleigh Town Centre, and then you've got to get over to Chestnut Avenue, which is nearly in Valley Park in Test Valley, so it's quite the other side of Eastleigh. So it's a long journey for all those people to make on very congested roads, and with more housing development, I do think it's really not really going to be sensible to close Fair Oak or Hedge End or even Bishop's Waltham. I think we ought to look at how we could overcome that one, but I will certainly be supporting the amendment. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Taylor, Kim.
Thank you, Chair. I will be supporting this amendment, and I'd like to thank the proposer for making appropriate amendments to our original amendment as well. I mean, one of the main reason that I'm supporting this amendment is because I think we do need to go away and have another look at some of this. I mean, I'm very lucky in Basingstoke, our tip isn't down for proposed closure. However, I do anticipate additional capacity and issues arising as a result of other closures there. But I think for me, and also reflecting the comments made by the working group, is that perhaps what we've seen so far in terms of analysis is that it falls a little short of dealing with the area of concerns that we identified, and also other concerns that have been raised today. And in particular, and I hope the Cabinet will be listening to the kind of things that we're saying we need to have analysed and further considered, is understanding really what we mean by minimum service standard in respect of this particular issue, understanding properly, and we don't really have a good analysis of that, of the full costs of decommissioning and disposal, thinking carefully about any loss of income. We all received a letter from a resident about lost income where we charge others to visit the site. Comprehensive details in respect of highways or environmental impacts. We need more on that. And also comprehensive journey and capacity planning. Everybody has mentioned those kind of things. They're all the knock-on effects that we get. I am thoroughly not convinced by arguments that fly tipping will not ensue. According to the Commons Research Library, they have a report on fly tipping, and it's December 2023, and they are very clear in that report that the three main causes of fly tipping are financial gain by perpetrators, laziness or an attitude that it's somebody else's problem, but importantly, a lack of waste disposal facilities or easy access to them. one of the three top causes of fly tipping. And the report actually acknowledges that the council closure of sites would be appealing for financial reasons, but that they believe that it would result in additional fly tipping. Interestingly, the report also suggests and busts another myth that most fly tipping is commercial, unscrupulous commercial people, is that the second most common size of fly tipping is a small car boot size or less. That's domestic. So it is, you know, we actually need to accept responsibility for the fact that we will be causing a problem. All right, it's for others to sort out, the local districts and boroughs and the poor landowners for whom people will be doing this. But also I'd like to sort of perhaps bring to the attention of something that may not have been thought about, is organised crime in relation to fly tipping. And actually organised crime in relation to use of tips as well. There's this Cardiff in Wales has a real issue with this, and it's something that I have observed, is that where you make access difficult, either by closing times or by reduced access, by long distances and so on, somebody will make some money out of that. And quite often that involves modern slavery and taking advantages of people who are perhaps unwaged in some fashion or on very low incomes, and getting them to pick up people's waste from their kitchen redevelopment or whatever. It goes in their car boot and they go off to the tip, and it then you know, gets processed as household waste. It's big business there. It really is big business. It's a real criminal activity. And if people have to travel further, if it becomes less competitive for commercial carriers, for local commercial carriers as well, because there are less centres for them to go to, we're going to see that kind of impact as well. So I'm not moved by there's no evidence that this change won't impact fly tipping. I think it will, and I think that has a cost for everybody else. And I don't think that we've looked at that. So for all those reasons, I think I will support this proposal, particularly if issues have to come back here. And I hope the Cabinet is listening very carefully to the kind of things that we feel need to be considered further. Thank you.
Councillor Rod Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've listened very carefully to the debate this morning, and I must say that I will be supporting the amendment. And looking more specifically at the Aldershot, Farnborough and Hartley-Whitney situation, there were some very interesting points made by Councillor Withers and Councillor Crawford. Farnborough, putting it over capacity with the closure of Hartley-Whitney and Aldershot, will have consequences going back to pre-COVID, where on the highway into the site in Farnborough, you couldn't move, and it was actually blocking the main road, the main highway out of Farnborough, the A327. I certainly don't want to return to those days where my mailbox was constantly full with complaints about we can't move to get to our homes, we can't move on the highway. So looking at possible alternatives, I think that the easy option has been taken here without looking a little bit deeper. And the answer has been floating around for the last 5 years. In fact, I've written to previous leaders and to officers about the possible solution, which is, in fact, building out the Wellesley recycling centre and making that a super facility that would cater for both Farnborough and Aldershot. And in conjunction with that, there was a proposal by Wellesley to put a new junction onto the A331, which would be very close to the proposed site of the recycling centre. So this would make access for both Farnborough residents and Aldershot residents a lot easier. And of course, the bonus in all of this would be that potentially you would release building land both in Farnborough and in Aldershot, which would go some way to satisfying the increased MPPF that's being imposed upon us.
Councillor Todd.
Thank you very much indeed. Yes, I will also be supporting the amendment. I think there are 4 areas that need more work, but there are also opportunities that need to be more carefully looked at. Since we're in the game of quoting RAP guidance, I thought I'd quote this paragraph from it. Closure of sites should not be considered as either the first or the easy option when trying to save costs. There are many other opportunities for improving HWRC efficiency that can be explored, and these are discussed throughout this guide. So the RAP guidance that we've talked about tells us that closure of sites should be absolutely the last option. And indeed, that's also what the feedback from residents was. It was absolutely the last option that they wanted looked at. And I think we owe it to them to actually listen to them and listen to the RAP guidance and make sure that those other options are properly explored. There were 4 areas where I had questions. We've talked a lot about mileage and travel. I don't think the mileage assessment is adequate. I don't think it's consistent with the RAP guidance, and indeed the RAP guidance was what was quoted in the legal constraint section of the paper, so I think it matters that we properly understand what that says and how we're measuring against it. I don't see it as consistent with local transport plan policies, and I certainly don't see it as consistent with our carbon objectives. And I would state again what I said in one of my questions, which is I'm genuinely disappointed about the carbon assessment of the likely decline in recycling following closures of HWRCs and the impact on mileage. The second thing is about capacity, and I'm very pleased that I'll come back to a point that Councillor Irish made. You know, we have a 71% increase in housing targets in Hampshire in the NPPF. The entire NPPF and everything that we're all trying to do in our local plans in districts is about infrastructure planning. You have to have an infrastructure delivery plan as part of your local plan now. It seems to be lunacy to be cutting infrastructure when all the national guidance is saying you need to plan your infrastructure better. And a good example, and I'm glad Councillor Irish mentioned it, which ties into the realities on the ground. Now, anybody who's been in the Borley Green, Horton Heath area knows that there is an enormous amount of construction going on in that area that's having a lot of impact on neighbouring communities. What you may not know is if you want to know where Borley Green and Horton Heath are, and they may not be first, is plot Bishop's Waltham, Hedge End and Fair Oak. And Borley Green and Horton Heath are in the middle of all 3. So there is a bit of me that says, in terms of that detailed logistical planning, I'm not sure it's going on. And I do think the comment that was made by Councillor Cooper about thinking about consolidated infrastructure that frees up land that can be used for other purposes is very well made and something to be thought about in these areas of change for major development, and maybe offers better solutions than just thinking in terms of existing sites. And then the bit which I do think we need to do more work on is this point about, you know, the paper in front of us, although not the consultation paper, when it comes to days and hours, talks about hours. Now, actually, that isn't what residents said. What they said they wanted us to look at was days, and it's not in the paper in front of Cabinet. So, as a minimum, I think they are owed the option that the residents said in the consultation they most wanted us to look at. And yes, I think we could be challenging in terms of the days of opening and even potentially times of year of opening. But also, and this is the other opportunity that feels like it's missing in all of this, is I think we need to take a one system approach. The County Council is not the only guardian of place in Hampshire. It's also not the only waste authority. You know, for good or ill, if there is more fly tipping as a result of this, and I fear there will be, you know, it is the districts that will be picking up the tab, and obviously I have a non-pecuniary interest in a district as a district councillor. it will be the districts picking up the tab for fly tipping, and indeed the modelling of impact on collections is also something that needs to be thought about and worked through. And I'm not sure that we're doing enough to have a one system approach. And then the other group that is always worth talking to when you're under financial pressure is parishes. And that's not just because they have an uncapped precept, but also because they also have a really strong interest in place and how a single place works. And we heard earlier today, earlier on from Councillor Porter talking about Alsford. It's a really good example of where a collaborative conversation could be had. There's actually a discussion going on in Alsford about the location of bring sites in Alsford and whether they're in the right place and whether there could be more parking places or other options as a result. That feels to me like a conversation that should be going on between the parish, the district and the county, but I don't see that in this paper. And we've had this before when we had the unilateral withdrawal of glass bins from HWRCs. We just don't have a one public team approach to how we achieve the savings that need to be, say, achieved in districts and in the county. But we do so in a way where we're all focused on how can we improve the lives of our residents. So I think there's a huge opportunity for a more collaborative approach in terms of how we go forward. So I think there are important questions that need more attention. I agree with the previous comments that have been made on that. And I think there are opportunities that need to be looked at and frankly that we owe to the public to properly evaluate, particularly in terms of days of opening and a tiered approach to that. Because again, it seems strange to have let's do all of Hampshire on the same basis. Why would you do that? And so I will be supporting the amendment today. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. If there are no other councillors, sorry, Councillor Wallace.
That's twice, Chair. Throughout this meeting, we've heard lots about legal minimum service levels. I have particular concerns about how those legal minimum service levels have been set when there's no statutory requirements. This is an important issue as the council has a commitment of getting to legal minimum service levels, but in this case, those levels are unclear. And the absence of statutory guidance, surely it's right for us to agree what those minimum service levels are for our residents should be before deciding to close any recycling centres. Second point I wanted to make was on the impact to our rural communities. We've had several proposals, we've heard several proposals over the last couple of weeks, which appear to disproportionately penalise our rural residents. We shouldn't be sending a message out that that living in a rural area is a penalty. Passenger transport has already been cut to the bare bones out in the countryside, and we had proposals to cut it further. These Hampshire waste recycling centres, these household waste recycling centres, are hitting more of our rural population. It leads to the question: what's next? Do we decide that roads in the countryside aren't so important because fewer people use them? Finally, obviously there's the environmental impact. Smaller sites are better at recycling. A higher proportion of material that is brought to smaller household waste recycling centres is recycled. It's a good thing. Obviously, having more sites means there's obviously, we've talked a lot about the distance to travel and the environmental impact of that. And the mitigation of potential risk of fly tipping. So there's lots of environmental reasons why it makes sense to keep more sites open as well. So yeah, there are the three reasons I wanted to pick on. Thank you.
Hopefully I haven't missed anyone else. Councillor Bloomfield did miss someone else.
The disadvantage of sitting slightly out of the chairman's eye line. I would just like to, I'm supporting this proposal, obviously. I'd like to pick up on something that Councillor Todd said about Borley Green, Hedge End and Horton Heath. And all I can say there is, yes, quite. Councillor Irish commented on the journey between Fair Oak and Eastleigh. Now, 20 minutes is what I assume. Excuse me. What I assume is in the plan. You're a lucky man or woman if you do 20 minutes between Fair Oak and Eastleigh. And if you get into Eastleigh, you then got to go across Eastleigh to get to the recycling centre. So my guess is that 20 minutes is extremely optimistic. And it's really about accessibility. We want people to use recycling centres. The Fair Oak and Horton Heath have fairly easy access to Fair Oak Recycling Centre. Coming from where I live, I can actually be there, get my waste recycled or whatever, and then be back home within about 40 minutes, which is probably about what it would take me actually to get to Eastleigh. I've spoken obviously at length to Councillor Parker-Jones. She can't be here today, she's away, but Fair Oak Recycling Centre may or may not be in my division, it may or may not be in her division. It's right on the border, we're not entirely sure, but both of us are agreed that that really must stay open. What we also discussed between us was Bishop's Waltham. Now at the moment, Bishop's Waltham has no councillor to speak for them. So I think I'd like to speak up for the residents of Bishop's Waltham. If we close Fair Oak and we close Hedge End and we close Bishop's Waltham, their recommended site, I guess, is Sedgensworth, which realistically, was it about 15 miles there? Certainly 10. So if we say optimistically a 20-mile round trip to get from Bishop's Waltham to Sedgensworth, where you then have to fight your way through the traffic on and around the M27, and that area is one of the worst bits of road I can imagine to get to. So if we close Bishop's Waltham and we close Fair Oak and then we close Hedge End, that really puts Bishop's Waltham residents in a huge problem for accessing a household waste recycling centre. And I think for those people in particular, 18% aren't sure where they would go, 12% wouldn't visit any. Well, if you close them all, they're not going to visit any at all, are they? So I really do support this motion, and I really think that we need to reassess the accessibility of household waste recycling centres and actually making them easier for people to use. My last comment would be a friend of mine lives in Mortimer's Lane in Fair Oak, about a quarter of a mile from the recycling centre. A couple of years ago, he actually manhandled a 3-seater sofa on foot to the recycling centre. Now, how many 3-seater sofas are going to end up dumped by the side of the road if you can't get them to a recycling centre? So, yes, I certainly support this motion. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'd like to thank the councillors who made the deputations. I'd like to thank the officers for the report. I'd like to thank all the members of this committee for their thoughts today. I'm going to make a couple of comments on my own. The reason you haven't heard from anyone arguing for Petersfield is that I'm barred from doing this. I chair this committee, and Councillor Oppenheimer is sitting over to my right on the cabinet table. Petersfield had the second highest number of respondents about this consultation after Borden. It is the single biggest issue by miles that I've had in my inbox as a councillor in 8 years. I've had considerably more correspondence than this I've had on almost every other issue put together. The residents of Petersfield feel extremely strongly about keeping their tip open in all circumstances. The second thing I want to talk about is the changes we're going to do with our households coming over the next few years. Mr. Horan obviously knows this, Mr. Potter knows it better than I do. I chair Project Integra. We're going to be moving towards collecting food waste from all our residents. We're going to be moving towards, in my view, mixed recycling of glass and recycling together from all our residents. We're going to need to have a great deal of goodwill from our residents about what the district's going to pick up from them, what we as a disposal authority are then going to dispose of. The idea that our most enthusiastic recyclers are therefore going to have to take more of their recycling further goes in against the grain of trying to encourage our residents to work with us as the county council or indeed the district council to collect waste. And I'm very concerned about the message that would send about the importance we're attaching to trying to recycle more in Hampshire. And the third point I wanted to make was something that has come up repeatedly today about legal minimum service levels. Our officers are in an incredibly difficult position. I'm incredibly grateful to them for the report. The council has focused on that as a route, and so much of what we've talked about today has been as a result of that council decision. And therefore, for Cabinet to think about what that actually means and about the financials that we all know about the financial hole we're in and about the incredibly difficult position all our officers, not just in this directorate, but in the other directorates, have been put under by that potential 175 million hole, it's an incredibly difficult problem to solve. And for councillors to say, we wouldn't do that, we've got to come up with the alternative, what the something else is. It's a very difficult position, and I don't envy them. But I do feel that the recommendation in front of us about keeping our recycling centres open is one that I personally feel incredibly happy to support. With that, I'm going to invite Mr. Blogg. Patrick, do you want to make any further comments before we get to the vote?
Thank you, Chair. All I was going to say was I'm very grateful for you, Chair, for your comments there about officers. Thank you.
If there are no other comments, I'm going to, at this stage, invite a vote on the amendment in front of us. That is not on the papers, it's clearly in front of us, and then we'll go to the recommendation on the actual papers after that. So can I have a show of hands, please, in favour of that amendment? Those in favour? That is unanimous. Thank you all very much. That recommendation therefore replaces the recommendation that originally was on page 3 of the pack, and I would therefore like to take a vote on that recommendation to go forward to Cabinet, please. All those in favour? Once again, that is unanimous. Thank you very much. That item is more or less finished. I'd like at this stage to call on Councillor North. Kirsty, if you'd like to make any comments, and I believe Nick Adams-King, the leader, may also wish to make some comments following Councillor North. So Kirsty, over to you first.
Thank you very much, Chairman, for the opportunity to say a few words at this point in your meeting. Today's deliberations over the household waste recycling centre proposals mirrored that of the public consultation, with clear strength of feeling shown. Thanks to the 7 councillors who came to advocate on behalf of their communities today, and to committee members for their own representation and deliberations. Points have been made very clearly on the capacity of remaining sites, the knock-on effect and potential for fly tipping, and the distance for residents to travel to an alternative site now and in the context of future development with new housing targets in the near future, as well as the future of waste collection at the curbside. As you've heard me say before, the ever-increasing cost of delivering care to our vulnerable children and adults in Hampshire has put considerable strain on the Council's financial situation, meaning difficult decisions are needed on the future of some public services. When Cabinet meet on the 14th of October to make final decisions on all of the savings proposals, we will reflect fully on your thoughts and comments. Myself and Councillor Baumann, alongside other Cabinet colleagues, are here today. Please be assured your amendment has been heard and will be considered alongside that of the public consultation responses, media reports, and the impact of those proposals on Hampshire residents were they to go ahead. As we come to the end of a bumper round of pre-scrutiny, I want to thank you all for your contributions over the past 4 meetings. Thanks. Over to our leader.
So, colleagues, at the risk of turning this into a thanks fest, I thought as this was the final one of the select committees, I should just reflect on what we've heard over the last few weeks. And I think it's been a really excellent example of the way in which we all can engage in the process of looking at issues. Thank you to all of you for today. Thank you to our colleagues who came along to put forward the arguments for their own areas. And not just to them, but to everybody who's engaged over the last few weeks with the various proposals and the various meetings where we've discussed and I think really effectively and professionally interrogated all of the proposals that are before us. None of these are easy decisions. None of us became elected to have to make these kind of decisions, but they are the ones that are in front of us, and they're the ones that we need to make in order to ensure that our budget is sustainable going forward. We've heard some really great presentations from people, not least from the pupils and PTA of St Mark's School earlier this week about school crossing patrols. And I think, and I hope that you've noticed as have many others, that throughout this, they're in different combinations based upon everybody's diaries, but the Cabinet have made a real effort to be present at as many of the select committees as they possibly can, to hear these debates in person, to hear your concerns, to hear the concerns of those people who have been to present to us, and to understand the amendments and the alternative options you would like us to consider on the 14th of October when we finally make our decisions. So that's going to be a long and busy day. You are very welcome to come and participate in that meeting should you wish, and I want to reassure you and the people of Hampshire that we have listened to all of your concerns. We will be working hard between now and then to look at them and to see what we can do to both take those into account and to also look at ways by which we can continue to make our finances sustainable in the long term. So another thank you from me.
Thank you, Nick. Bad news, I'm afraid we haven't quite finished the meeting. We've got another item to discuss, which is item 6, work programme. If anyone does want to leave at this point, please do so. I believe we're still recording this so the public can watch what we're discussing. We're going to talk about in the future. So the work programme is on pages 125 to 128. There's a table on there with some suggestions at the bottom. Does any councillor have any other items they wish to add to that work programme? Councillor Connor-Ford.
Thank you, Chair. I'll try not to break the system this time. Yes, one item I would like to see back on the work programme relates to traffic management. Members may recall that the decision was made at the then ETE Scrutiny Committee, whereby the remaining district and borough councils who ran the parking management service actually relinquished that. That was brought back into County Council on the basis of cost savings. I believe we did ultimately approve for that to go ahead, but on the basis that it was brought back to Scrutiny Committee so that those cost savings could be evidenced. Thank you.
Does anyone else have any other suggestions of items we need to add to the work programme, particularly items for the next meeting, which is going to be on the 20th of January 2025? I'd be interested in the officer's view of that, potential future items, whether any of that list, waste and collaborative working, project over governance, US communication strategy, customers contact and highways maintenance, whether any of those, in your view, Patrick, are suitable for scrutiny in January, or whether we need to go away and think about what the appropriate topic should be, given the amount of scrutiny we've done for the SP25 over the last few weeks.
Thank you, Chair. If I may, can I take those away and have a look and have discussions with officers on the who lead in those areas? Because I think there is a timing issue with some of them, but we will make sure we come up with ones which are suitable for consideration.
Thank you. The one I'm most interested in is the point that Martin Todd raised about Integra and the way the districts and the county works together, potentially including parishes, on waste collection, waste disposal. I think it's a really important issue about trying to move forward with that. And if we are able to do that, I would certainly welcome that. If we have another issue, I'm very happy for the officers to take away their suggestions. And the recommendations on page 125 for this item, that the Universal Service Select Committee discuss and agree potential items for the work programme that can be prioritised and allocated by the Chairman of the Universal Services Select Committee in consultation with the Director of Universal Services. Are we agreed on that motion? Agreed. Excellent. So at 12:34, I thank you all for your attendance, your thoughts, your comments over the 4 meetings, and hope you all have a very good weekend. The Cabinet meeting to discuss all these issues is on October the 14th. Thank you. And that concludes the meeting. Can we stop the recording, please?